So, good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Last session for everyone. How's the event till now? All good? Learned a lot? Last session, we'll talk about shared calling. Although the timer says 1 hour and 10 minutes, we'll definitely wrap up early. We'll look at the different scenarios, how shared calling would be working, how the telcos are supporting it, which telcos are supporting it. We'll talk about all those things. Operator connect, direct routing, calling plan. We'll talk about all those options. And we'll look at every single thing. It's something here. Okay. Uh, the Thank you to all the sponsors. Without them, the event would have not been possible. The platinum sponsors, the gold, silver sponsors, the attendees, and the organizers. Without them, the event would have not been that successful as well. Cool. Something will keep the agenda really short, quick. Something about me. 12 years working in the whole Microsoft 365. Prior to this, Sky for Business 2015, 2019, Link 2010, um, LCS, live meeting services. All those things have been supporting since those days. Been working with Momentum Telecom, um, based in Toronto, helping customers deploy Microsoft Teams, Teams Voice. My specialty is more on the regulated countries like India, China, Middle East. China is one thing that we have solved. UAEs and India is the other ones that we are working upon to get solved as well. So China is where we can offer you a complete cloud-based solution out of the box, natively, nothing required on-prem, and we can do it seamlessly using our services. Overview about shared calling, benefits, setting it up, configuring it, how it looks like, limitations of when you are using shared calling, whether it would be showing up the shared calling DID in the Teams application or not, um, what all functionalities comes in. We'll not talk about the auto attendance, but we'll definitely talk about how the functionality is really important when you are trying to use the Microsoft Queues app, the call queue, uh, because every user needs to be enabled on the enterprise voice side to be a part of the queues app or the call queues. And then we'll talk about certain troubleshooting scenarios and common issues as well. So a quick overview, the same slide that I had it yesterday, in terms of the licensing, what is required when you are using a user license, E1, G1, A1, G3, A3, or E3, or if you're using E5, all those licenses will fall under your user licenses, Teams Room Pro and Teams Room Standard. That needs to be Teams Room Basic. But those are the other two on the room side that you have. And on the shared device, you still have the shared device license that can be there. Apart from that license, you still need to have a connectivity option. It could be the Microsoft Calling Plan, Operator Connect, Teams Phone Mobile, or direct routing. Direct routing, you have two options. It could be direct routing hosted by a carrier, or you could be hosting your direct routing services yourself as well. So both options are on the direct routing side. Uh, Enable up the licenses. If you're using the calling plan, just assign the licenses, assign with the phone number, emergency calling policies. The services would be enabled instantly. With Microsoft calling plans, there are various options, like we already know. 120, like you have 4 variants of it, pay as you go. If you want to use shared calling with the Microsoft calling plan, you have to be on pay as you go. You cannot be on any other plans when you are using shared calling. It has to be a pay as you go subscription on the calling plans. Operator Connect, you would have to connect with the respective operators that you want to look at, because not every operator supports shared calling, and there is a reason for that. When you apply shared calling to a user account, shared calling policy supports up to 10,000 users in one policy. So the operator does not have a visibility how many users are enabled on the shared calling capability. Based on that, the trunking at the back end, they don't have those visibilities. That's the reason why I have been talking to major of the operators. They are like, because of that one single reason, some of them are not supporting shared calling on their operator connect services. With direct routing, yep, you can always do this with direct routing. Before even shared calling came in, it was natively available with direct routing, where you could have done the extensions capability as well. The last two options are how you would be doing it via PowerShell and connecting the policies as such. Now, shared calling, are we going back? Are we going back to the extensions? To a certain extent, yes. Because when you have extensions, when you have shared calling, you have one DID that's assigned to 10,000 users. So the call comes on your main IVR and it gets routed from there. So that's uh, so there are two options you could have. You could have like dial by extensions, or you would have dial by name. If you have more than 5 people with the same name, the first name and the last name, the IVR doesn't work. So you would prefer to have extensions if you have a big organization and you have multiple accounts. Even if you have accounts that are created just for your admin login separately, those are considered as an account as such. Is supported on the Microsoft Pay as you go plan, Operator Connect, and direct routing. So that's what we discussed as well. And your dynamic 911 capability for the states as well as for other countries are being supported as well. Like I mentioned, you can do extensions. The functionality is available. Um, Same thing. Extension can be used for internal rollout as well. Why shared calling? And if you would have been talking to any of the customer success manager for your new projects for rolling out Teams Voice, they'll be like, okay, let's first roll out using shared calling and enable all the users, because this is this helps start up the users to start adopting Teams. That helps because number porting takes time. Whether you are doing it with the calling plan, whether you're changing your operator, whether you're doing it has until and unless you have the same operator providing you with the capability on your direct routing or operator connect and your existing legacy PBX as well, then it's much more easier because they have to do the trunk to trunk based porting as such. But with with shared calling, you can enable 10,000 users, one single policy, and there you go. Only catch with that is if you have multiple different locations, you can still create multiple different policies. But if you have multiple countries, in that case, you would have to have multiple different policies created because you have to map the 911 address as such. How does the call flow work? Inbound, outbound. So when the call comes in on your main auto attendant. The call when the call comes in, the call comes in on your main auto attendant, and then we leverage dial by name or dial by extension. Dial by name, dial by extensions. Extensions are preferred because we give extensions in shared calling to all the users, so we can definitely do that. When the outbound call is made, the caller ID of your auto attendant is what is being displayed when the outbound call is made. Um, Caller ID is one of the most important thing. So you can have those customized, but having the same number would go out when the outbound call is made based on the PSTN options. Calling plan or the PSU calling plan, direct routing or upper. So that's the three-way how you would have the PSTN connectivity as such. Any questions till now on the outbound calling, inbound calling, licensing? Okay, pretty clear. Then the question comes in, how will 911 work? Will the same caller ID go out? Any thoughts? Will it show the mainline number? Okay, now Okay. Okay. So when you have shared calling enabled in your policies, you also have to have some reserved number of DIDs for 911. Why do we need that? Just in case the call gets disconnected. A callback has to happen, or the 911 or the PSAP team needs to call back. It should not go via the auto. So that's the reason why you would have a pool of numbers that would always be available in shared calling. The rule of thumb is every 25 users, you need to have one DID. So based on your number of users, you would have that much number of DIDs in your reserve for shared calling. That you no, yeah, but based on your number of users, the max is 10,000. Um, what I feel in it, based on that, you will have that. There is no limit as such on the number of users, or that number that you can have. That is so the only reason why you would have that number, because that number would be associated with that user who makes the outbound call. And when the inbound call comes in, it goes to that user directly rather than going through the IVR. If you have dynamic 911 configured, the address would also be shared with the PSAP, and the call will go to your local PSAP rather than coming to Denver in the National Clearinghouse. So that's how your inbound, outbound call will work for 911. Any questions on this one? 15 minutes. It's only 15 minutes. It will stay with that user only for 15 minutes, and then after that, it goes back into the pool from the end of the call. Yeah. Any questions before we jump into the Teams Admin Center? Switch. Yes. Yep. Okay. So where do we call, or where do we configure the emergency callback number? This is the place where you have the emergency callback number configured. So your main admin center under voice, you would have a shared calling policy. This is where you would configure your policy. This is where you would configure what resource account I would be using when I'm making the outbound call, or what resource account would be used, and what would be the number and the address that would be used when you are making those outbound calls. This is on the operator connect that we have the configurations made. And then since I have only assigned this policy to one user, I still have one default number added here in the emergency callback number. Now, one thing to note, I'll jump into the user profile. How would it look like when you have the when you have the shared calling enable? This is how it would look like. Shared calling number, um, shared calling policy, what's the emergency address, all those things would show up. One important catch in terms of the shared calling is the user will not see this number that is assigned on the shared calling policy. So the user will not see, they'll see that dial pad. Or I will go in my Teams app. You will see this dial pad, you'll see all the calls, but you will not see this work phone number that is assigned to your profile. No, you won't see the extension as well. You would not see this work phone number tab at all. That's one thing that needs to be there. Um, from the 911 perspective, or for your dynamic 911 calling perspective, the functionality would work similarly like you have for a regular user assigned with a full E.164 format number. You'll have all those functionality being available. Um, your calling wise, your voicemail perspective, everything would remain like a full-fledged user. But the only thing that would not be there for the user would be the work phone number. So that's one thing to be mindful in terms of the uh, number. If your user is stating that if you enable a user on the shared calling standpoint and let them know, okay, you're enabled, they'll see a dial pad, but they'll not see the number. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, you would not see it here. When you dial the 911, you would see the number that you will get from the pool, because that number gets associated with your profile for next 15 minutes uh, until the call is disconnected. So the last, so you will see that number, that this is the number, that's the 911 address that's going out. But yes, this one thing is there that would not be there. I haven't seen anything on the roadmap whether we are working on adding it up, but this is something that would be there, that where they will not see the work phone number as such, but they would be able to make calls. All those functionality would remain. The inbound call, missed calls, you would be able to do all those capability seamlessly using the Teams phone as such. Any questions on this? One policy, you can go up to 10,000 users, the max. If you have multiple locations, based on that, it's always recommended to have multiple policies created, better from the best practices standpoint. And multiple countries, definitely you have to have multiple policies in different countries' perspective, because then you would not be able to assign this number if you have a different address. Until and unless it's a number that is coming in from direct routing, where you can do any mix and match. Any questions? Okay. Um, from the admin standpoint, I don't think so. There is much. I'll just go back one. You can have a policy assigned to individual users. You can assign it by users. You can also do a group-based policy. So if you have an Azure AD group created, you can assign that based on the group. Like in our scenario, we are assigning it by the group. So you can also do that in the form of a group as well. Okay. Something on shared calling benefits and what it means for the operator. Okay. 1 second. Let's go back to this. Let's go. Oh, sorry. Not this one. Slides. Okay. Um, in case of the benefits of shared calling, much more is when you are moving from one operator to other operator, or you're moving from your legacy platform and you want to do the migration really quick. This is the quickest way of completing up your migration. Or if you are if you have a contract that you are coming, it's upcoming for renewal, you can go quick on the deployment on the shared calling standpoint. One thing to note, shared calling, you still need to have Teams Phone standard license for every user. The thing that you would save on would be pay. If you are using the Microsoft calling plan, you don't need a Microsoft pay as you go calling plan for every user. The pay as you go calling plan would be assigned to that policy or to that resource account rather than being assigned to every user. So you'll save on the licensing on those sides. If you are using Operator Connect or direct routing, in that scenario, you will be saving on the DID cost that you would be paying to the operators for every DID that you would be assigning to your individual users. So those are some of the benefits that you would have from shared calling. Um, Now, what I always recommend my customers is your Teams room devices or your shared devices. Now, shared devices and shared calling is somewhat confusing for customers as well to understand because it is shared, the naming conventions. Um, so, shared devices is your common area phones, which is in your lobbies, in your um, for making any of the it could be at your receptionist as well. So those phones can be your shared phones or the shared devices. On top of that, you could have a shared calling policy created because those phones won't be making that much number of calls outbound. So you'll save some amount of cost using the shared calling capabilities in your Teams room, because even Teams room would not make that much number of calls. But then, uh, since it's enabled on the PSTN, you would be able to make 911 calls in if anything happens in that room. So that's one advantage of using shared calling with shared devices as well as your rooms as well. I was talking to one of the customer. They are having big locations and not and lots of shared devices. And we started with the shared device or the shared calling capability. The reason for that is not everyone uses PSTN every day. Most of your calls are teams to teams call, so not everyone uses it. So they kept a threshold that if a user makes more than 120 minutes of call in a month, they'll move the user from shared calling to a full-fledged license, either the Microsoft calling plan or the Operator Connect. So that's how they move the users from shared calling towards Microsoft Teams dedicated number as well. You get the dedicated number, you get the dedicated calling plan for that respective users. So that's the advantage that you have for shared calling as such. Any more questions? Go ahead. Yeah, you can definitely. I'll tell you some more examples. You can have users on calling plan in one country. I can have users on direct routing in another country, and I can have users on Operator Connect on another country. Three different countries, three different variant. Everything will still work. If you dial on the mainline number and you want to search for any user, you'll still be able to find that. I have three different modes of how I am enabling telephony because at the end of the day, it works on your Azure AD lookup for your dial by name and extension as well, because you have the business phone attribute there. It uses from that. So no problems in terms of dial by name, dial by extension. The functionality would work seamlessly without any problem. Any more questions? Okay. Tips and tricks in terms of shared calling on the okay. So if you have shared calling and you want to enable multiple, like if you have more than 10,000 users and you want to use the same resource accounts on the shared calling policy, absolutely. So your resource account can be the same, but your shared calling policy cannot be same if you have more than 10,000 users in one single shared calling policy. For every country, like I mentioned, since emergency calling is in place, uh, you can use the same number, but it's recommended to have for every country, you have your own policy created as such. Number porting, all those things from the shared calling perspective remains the same. Okay, on the Microsoft calling plan or the Microsoft pay as you go calling plan, there is a limitation. There is some countries that is not supported on shared calling. The operators which are supporting Microsoft at the backend, they are they are still working upon to have the functionality enabled, but those are certain countries, specifically Australia and Japan, because those country in those two locations, um, in Australia where Microsoft is using Telstra, and in Japan Microsoft is using KDDI. So those are the two carriers which are still not supporting this. So on the pay as you go subscription as well, in those countries you would not be able to do it. In Czech Republic, they are using a carrier at the back end as well. So in certain countries where you have pay as you go subscription, in those you will have to uh, pick and choose, because in those countries you would have to look up for the operator connect option or the direct routing options. So those are one of the limitations on the Microsoft calling plan number to support on the support of shared calling. Now, one more thing to be one of the most important thing when you're using the Microsoft pay as you go calling plan for shared calling is not all the numbers would be supporting it, like all uh, the auto attendant and the call queue numbers that you get, not every number would support shared calling, because at the end of the day it is trunk, it is a DID that Microsoft is using as well. So you would have to open up a ticket with the PSTN help desk to understand which numbers would be supported. And if you have one specific number or you have multiple specific numbers for shared calling, you would have to give that number to the team, and then they can have that functionality enabled on that respective DID. Any questions? Now, with shared calling, your users are enabled on Teams phone. You can use the same users in Microsoft Queues because you can now have them as a part of your queues. If you have an HR team, you want to enable them on the queue on the call queue perspective, you can have them as a part of the call queue as well. You don't need a dedicated DID for every user, and then it would work seamlessly without any problem. From the reporting perspective on the Queues app, I'll quickly jump into the Queues app as well and quickly give you a view from that standpoint. So if you have users who are enabled on, if you have this user who is enabled on shared calling, can be a part of a call queue. Any calls that the user has received in past few days, you would be able to do that. Opt in, opt out, all the functionality of a typical queues app, whisper badge monitor, all those functionality would be available when you are using shared calling with the queues app as well. One thing to remember, if you want to use queues app, you need Teams Premium. That's a mandate. You would have to have Teams Premium. Teams Premium doesn't only provide Queues app, but there are Microsoft Places that have some additional security. You get your transcription for your meetings. All those functionality comes in natively with Teams Premium. So that's one thing that we have to be mindful of. But Queues app would be able to support you in terms of shared calling. Your users are enabled on enterprise voice, and the functionality would work seamless. Any questions? Any hacks you want to know? How we can skip the Microsoft calling plan as well, and you can still add users on the call queues. Just enable them with enterprise voice tab, and you can still add those users in your call queues as an option. If you come back into the user profile, just enable them with enterprise voice. Don't assign them with the DID. They can still be enabled on the Q's app from that standpoint. They'll be able to receive calls. If they want to make calls outbound, they can definitely make calls. They can make calls on behalf of the queues. You can use the caller ID of the queues as well. So those are certain tips and tricks that I can talk about. Shared calling, something that you would use. You'll still need the Teams phone standard license for enabling the enterprise voice or toggling this on. You will still need the user to be enabled on the enterprise voice side. Any questions? No, that cannot be a part of the queue. The reason for that, it has to be an auto attendant. The reason for that is when your inbound call comes in on shared calling, it will come on your main IVR and it has to be an auto attendant. From the auto attendant, you can do a nesting to the queue. No problems on that side. That will work. But the main resource account that you are using for shared calling, it has to be an auto attendant. It cannot be a call queue because dial by name, dial by extension is only available in your auto attendance. It's not available in the queues. Feedback has been provided to the product group to have that one, and as well as the business hours and non-business hours. That is so that I can create less number of auto attendants. So even that has been provided back. Any more questions? Okay. Okay. Yep. Okay. Thank you. If you have an extension, it will show up your work phone number as an extension. But if you don't have it, no. Probably that was my last slide for the day. Any questions? Any questions before we wrap up with the final session? No change. You can still use the global dial plan. If you want to use custom ones, you can definitely have no problems on those. Operator Connect would work on your global ones. Calling plan would again work on your global ones. But if you are using direct routing, you would have to have the ones customized. Shouldn't be. Okay. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming in.